What is the most horrific thing that someone has told you super casually? Coach bus driver was like, sorry the bus was late guys. The traffic was caused by someone who committed suicide by walking into traffic. Looks at one of the passengers getting off the bus. You remember the blood skid marks, right? All of us who were waiting at the bus station were like WTF. Guy said it like he sees it every day or something. When you drive for a living you could see the rapture and you just get pee at all the abandoned cars on the road. I once asked my grandfather, how you doing grandpa? And he said, not good, not good. I moved my bowels 3 times already today. Went to the doctors and they put a tube in my penis. Should I mention we were at a family funeral? Hey, you asked. I was on a date with this girl and we drove by a fast food joint and a shared parking lot. She deadpan said, my mom used to park here and shoot H with her BF while me and my brother sat in the back seat. Me, oh, wow. I was her H baby. My mom was using while she was pregnant. Me, oh. A relative told me about killing man who was attempting to rape him in the back of a truck once casually over drinks. To be fair, that's a pretty good reason to kill someone. A couple of years ago I was on one of those music festival cruises. I was sitting down waiting on my friends to finish their drinks and whatnot when this lady sits down next to me. Somehow we get to talking about dogs. I tell her about mine. She tells me that hers is a comfort dog. I didn't ask her to elaborate because it wasn't any of my business, but she tells me it's because she didn't leave her house for 5 years. Again, I didn't ask why. She went on to tell me, a perfect stranger who'd been talking to her for all of 5 minutes, that her ex-boyfriend was stalking her and broke into her house so she had to shoot him and kill him. I think people overshare with strangers specifically because they know they'll probably never see you again. I've let really deeply personal things slip in front of strangers, not anywhere close to the scale of things in this thread, and then afterward wondered why I did. I think it's a way to help come to terms with trauma. Super fricked up if you're the listener though. Lawyer here. I was representing a teenage boy charged with molesting a younger relative. His mother told me, what's the big deal? I was molested as a kid and it didn't hurt me. When I was 20 something back in the 90s I was sitting on the front steps of my condo waiting for my sister's husband to pick me up. Nice old fellow, a tenant of my building, sat down next to me. His first sentence he'd ever spoken to me was, did you hear that they're taking my testicles off on Thursday? I responded that I had not. He continued, yep. Don't use them much anymore after the missus died. Mercifully at that moment my brother-in-law drove up. For some reason this is my favorite. That he was going to prison for burning down a church. I had seen this guy about 10 times since the supposed accident. We were all hanging out and he said guess what, and that was that. This man really said guess what to let you know he was going to prison for arson. Dude whipped out a picture from his suit. It was of a naked woman spread eagle on a bare rug. He said girls will do all sorts of things for a quick buck and if interested, we could go in for a photo shoot. Never met him before or since. He was like showing me his favorite pet. I was joking with an acquaintance once and he told me that he was going to move in a couple of months. We weren't really close enough for me to care, but I asked him why out of pure curiosity. In the same breath, without hesitation, he told me that he had been in the foster system all his life despite knowing his biological dad personally. His dad was some big businessman in New York City and didn't have the time to raise a son. He had been with 11 different families in 15 years and in each one he prayed he'd get adopted. It never happened. The family that he was with at that moment told him they were thinking about adopting him but changed their minds last minute. Now he's in a constant state of expecting to move because he just assumes that no one will ever want to adopt him. If you're reading this, I hope you're doing good, Michael. I usually work with kids in facilities. We had a boy come in, about 10 years old. They had him on a 72-hour hold because he threatened to kill a classmate at school. We got those often and most times it was just a kid being a kid and ends up being caught and we are forced to treat it as real. No big deal. Well, it actually was a huge deal. He would keep fidgeting in his chair and on the ground. I'd always say, Tom, try to keep still, okay, or Tom, if you are getting restless you can walk around the table if that helps. At lunch I was asking him how he was doing and he said it's weird to sleep all by myself. Some families bed share with siblings, so this wasn't way out of line. I said, oh, do you sleep in bed with your sister? And then he dropped this on me. No, daddy likes to sleep in my bed, but I don't like it because it always hurts my bottom. Now I'm like, frick in my head. They tell you to not express emotion if the kid isn't so as coolly as I could. I said, oh, why is that? And he told me all about how daddy playing a poking tickle game, but he can't show me what it is because he is not allowed to tell anyone. Guys, I wanted to cry. We ended up having to take him to the emergency room for an anal exam, which confirmed his dad had been anally raping him for so long that he couldn't remember a time it didn't happen. That's only one of many horrible stories I have from that job. And now I need a drink. Just remembering it makes me feel sick and shaky with anger. I hope his dad is slowly tortured for the rest of his life. I have homicidal intrusive thoughts. They border on impulses and I often feel like I'm being pulled towards them. I walked out on a date in the middle of a movie because I couldn't stop thinking about strangling her. To be fair, we were at a mental hospital. Well, hey, good for them for walking out and seeking treatment. I hope they got the help they need to cope with it. My roommate and I are casually playing video games. Third roommate enters. Man, don't you guys hate it when you crap a bunch of blood? We don't crap blood. Really? You don't crap and have some blood come out every once in a while? Bro, you need to go to the doctor. Apparently it was just a hemorrhoid, but still. Pro tip: the redder the blood on the toilet paper is, the closer to daylight the cut or tear is. Dark brown or black blood is from inside the intestines, but bright red blood is just from some disruption of, for lack of a better word, the balloon knot. I was working construction with this older guy who was telling me about his dream to open a car detailing shop. As the conversation continued, he revealed that he couldn't for something like 10 years because he killed someone drinking and driving and had just gotten out of prison. He was working really hard at getting to a better place, but in the last few years I've seen him around town drunk. I hope you can find your way back to that dream, Billy. Taxi driver was a jerk, bragging about how he had taken advantage of a drunk girl he picked up in the party zone of the city. It was the most uncomfortable taxi ride of my life. I hope you fricking reported him. That her dad was a sheriff, raped her on the regular, and she had many miscarriages because of it. I think it was our third day working together. We had a shift alone and she was a talker. Usually she spouted nonsense, but she busted the above out like she was telling me how her dad taught her to ride a bike. I was speechless and kept my head down in my work while she started on another topic. I later learned she was a pathological liar, but I had never really heard rape mentioned casually and it threw me off. Offered to kill someone for me and admitted to her previous murder. I was ranting to my grandfather how much I hated the abusive scumbag guy my mom was dating, and my grandfather, completely sincerely, offered to shoot him for me. He casually told me about how he'd shot and killed my grandmother's first husband in the 60s and gotten away with it, and how even if he did get caught at his age he didn't give a frick about prison. My grandmother's first husband's death was insanely suspicious, and I have no doubt in my mind he was telling the truth. It's been commonly held family legend for years that he was murdered. Needless to say, I did not take him up on this offer. Jesus Christ, how'd your relationship with him change after that bombshell? A neighbor told me how she was suicidal at one point and almost drove herself and her kid into a lake. Then she tried to convert me to her religion. We meet every Sunday down by the lake. A guy I worked with said that in the late 80s he lived with 5 other guys in an apartment in New York. Sometime after the HIV test is developed, all of the roommates agree to get tested. Apparently the results were mailed to them. Basically, one guy got the mail and opened everyone's test. In so doing, he finds out one of the roommates has HIV. He shows the test results to every roommate except the guy who is HIV positive. Then they destroy the test results. They all pack their stuff and abandon apartment and the HIV positive guy. None of them ever spoke to the HIV positive roommate again. They never told him his test results. The guy I worked with laughed so hard telling me this story. It's freaked up. The guy I worked with had no remorse or a second of compassion even 30 years later, and knowing the HIV positive roommate probably died. Who knows how many people the unknowing HIV positive guy may have unknowingly transmitted HIV to before he had serious symptoms. JP, if you're reading this, frick you, heartless bastard. There are so many fricked up elements here. People can be so awful. Guy in high school tells me he was kidnapped and buried in a box. It was in the news all summer, like 14-year-old dude kidnapped and found by hunters buried in the woods. Guy shows up freshman year, it was freaking him. Being buried alive is probably the worst thing I can think of. That's horrifying. I was on a date with a girl and everything was going okay. Not amazing, but definitely still in the range of a second date. At some point, the conversation wasn't even sexual. She said that one of her favorite memories was regularly letting an older guy tie her up in the backseat and drive around, sharing her with random people off the street when she was 15. It was at that point I decided there would not be a second date. Poor girl was probably badly abused and tried rationalizing it as consent retroactively. This makes me sad. My therapist casually explained how he had to fight off a psychotic patient who was attempting to gauge out his eyes, the therapist not his own, and succeeded in popping one out, and that's why it seemed like he was looking in two directions at once. One of his eyes was glass. Thanks for sharing, doc. The 28th of December 2018. I received a phone call from my father's surgeon at about 3 AM. Went something like this. Is this my name? It is. This is Dr. Zizim calling in regards to your father. Does he have any other children or a wife? No wife, but 2 other children. Can you get them here? I think so. Why do you ask? Well, he's not doing so well and I don't think he's going to make it. My father had an allergic reaction to a blood thinner they used during one of his surgeries. This had caused clotting in the surgery area, which led to portions of his intestines to start to go necrotic within his body and leak intestinal fluid. This is known as sepsis and is highly deadly. 40-60% mortality rate. Dad lived, took 5 more life-saving surgeries and 3 months in the hospital, but he is still here breaking my balls on a daily basis. An acquaintance in high school casually told me that she lost her virginity by being gangbanged by her uncles. It was horrific then, and as an adult, it's even more horrific now. That poor freaking girl. I wanna throw up. Alzheimer's patient told me about the abduction, rape and murder of their daughter, and of the trial afterwards. Because of her condition, she's told me multiple times. Oh my god, can you imagine reliving that for the rest of your life? Jesus Christ. After a week of testing when I was 14, the doctor walked in, said, "You have lupus and about 6 months," handed me a prescription for 1 month's worth of prednisone and walked out. That was, incidentally, 24 years ago last month. He wasn't wrong about the lupus, but he was about the 6 months. Still, seriously fricked up thing to tell a kid like that. Jesus freaking Christ. I had just met this person and she told me that she was almost raped by one of her ex-boyfriends who followed her across the country and was hiding outside of her house in the dark before attacking. I don't even know how we got on the subject or why she told me something so personal. Oh, I accidentally did this recently. I was telling my boyfriend about how this girl I knew stalked me in October-November of last year. I hardly knew her, but she sent me some really aggressive and threatening messages, and would get really angry if I didn't answer her immediately. She actually non-consensually kissed a friend of mine and harassed another. After a few days of this, I cut contact with her and blocked her. After telling my boyfriend all this, he said something like, "Well, if she tries anything like that again, you could beat her up." And I just said, "Oh, no need to worry about that. She's dead now." Obviously complete shock on his face. I really should have led up to that better. Basically, I found out she had passed away in February for completely unrelated reasons. It really shook me up for a few days, but like I said, I didn't really know her. Of course, saying it the way I did was pretty callous of me. That sounded a bit like you killed her, but only a tiny bit. Middle-aged dude here. The amount of child abuse my peers went through, how casual they are about, and that they lament the fact that they can't do it to their kids. Whoa, that last bit. In my institute, a couple of girls of 16 laughed that they had thrown another girl over the bridge with her hair on fire, and that made the girl's father commit suicide. Nobody cared that they shouted it in class while laughing. There was even the teacher. What the frick? I have no words for how fricked up people can be. My boyfriend and I were hanging out with an old friend of my boyfriend's and discussing how a girl we sort of knew was raped by this guy we sort of knew she was friends with. My boyfriend and I were talking about how horrified and disgusted we were and his friend goes, I mean, he just had sex with her while she wasn't conscious. That's not really rape. I do that to my girlfriend all of the time. We immediately told him to leave and cut off that friendship. Overheard some guy talking to his friend on his phone while waiting for coffee. I dunno man. She said she didn't feel like it, but I thought if I just started anyway she'd get into it. All she did was cry the whole time, so I left. The optimist in me hopes he's talking about karaoke. The realist in me knows he isn't. At a previous restaurant job, I was the only person on shift one day that hadn't been raped. Most of the women I worked with were fairly young, early 20s. We were just doing prep work and somehow the conversation came around to sexual assault and every single one of them told their story. I've never felt so sheltered in my life. When I was in 7th grade, there was a rumor going around that a student had been raped during a football game. She got called to the principal's office in math class. It was a collaborative class, so 4-5 people at each desk. I was like, I hope she's okay, and the girl across from me said, and I quote, I don't know why everyone's making such a big deal about this. You can't rape black girls. Can't forget that one. I'm not even 100% sure I know what she meant by that, but my jaw still dropped. I once had a customer, who was an RN, tell me I've changed patients' charts because the doctor didn't know what they were doing. My brother and I don't get on because he sexually abused me as a child. Oh my god, I've never told anyone that before. That was heck of a first date. There wasn't a second. Her choice. I'm from Alabama, and around 2015 a new barber I went to told me that he was in the Alabama National Guard in the 60s. He said when they drove convoys through Selma, a predominantly black community that is to the west of Montgomery, the drivers would make their deuce and a halves. Large cargo trucks. Backfire on purpose so people sitting on their front porches would think the soldiers in the truck beds were shooting at them. Then he laughed his butt off about how scared they would get and how they'd hit the deck and scramble to get inside while he finished cutting my hair, and I just sat there in shock waiting for it to be over. At the time I didn't have the guts to say anything, but I did stop going to that barber shop. TLDR. A small town barber in Alabama casually bragged about terrorizing black people in Selma during the height of the civil rights movement while he was in the National Guard. While walking across campus to class, a friend of mine, at the time at least, just causally tells me he shot his brother in the face a few years back. Even kind of laughed about it. I was a paralegal. My boss was a landlord on the side and rented a place to a crack dealer who trashed the place on his way out. My boss was told that he needed a hazmat team to clean it. Instead he sent me and I had to provide the gloves and garbage bags. He was paying me an extra $20 a day and told me that I should be grateful because it would help with my $20,000 of collective debt. That was the moment that my self-esteem and ambition in life died. I haven't seen it since. So sorry to hear that. You prob had a good case for legal action against that pose. The woman who waxed my eyebrows casually dropped into the conversation that she was married at 14. Her parents got her married overseas. The government thinks she's 4 years older than she actually is. She was still married to the guy and seemed perfectly fine with this arrangement. When I worked at a grocery store, some dude I worked with made a comment about how days like this really make me want to stick a bomb. He literally named a specific military type bomb in the store. I know exactly where I'd put it too. I reported him. Never heard or saw anything from him again. Whoa, good for you for taking it seriously. I said something awful to a stranger. I didn't mean to do this. I was buying flowers in a grocery store. A small bouquet. The bagger thought he was a comedic genius and said, "AWW. Does your husband know you're buying flowers for yourself?" I tried to smile and shrug him off because explaining was going to be tragic. He was an older guy, a joker, someone who wanted to goad me into a smile. But my god, he wouldn't let it drop. I finally said, "Therefore a grave," and his face just crumpled. I hoped that would be enough, but no, he decided to try to redeem himself. "Oh, honey." I took a deep breath and said, "Truthfully, my babies." Then he hugged me. Jesus. I'm actually the one that tells people horrifying things casually. I worked in the court system for 3 years, and after I got desensitized to it, I thought telling people about schizophrenics murdering their own parents was a fun dinner convo. Now I just shut the frick up. GF and I was sitting at a cafe while on holiday in Croatia. A guy at the next table notices our language and starts chatting with us. He tells a little about how he moved to our country in the 90s, but comes home to Croatia for holidays. Then he casually mentions that it was all after he was put in a concentration camp during the Balkan Wars. I went to a Christian colleague's confirmation for his child. I'm atheist, so don't normally go to church, but I don't mind checking out how people do their things, and it was a nice event. It was just a normal service with normal Christians. No crazy evangelist type stuff. But when the priest was giving the congregation an update on the status of their sister church in Africa, the story of the African priest raising money for a trip to somewhere was delivered in the same mundane, passionless tone as the next item. That one of that priest's 5 daughters was murdered the previous week. No one batted an eye and the service just flowed on. No hiccups. No let's spend a moment to reflect, pray, whatever. It was just a point news item. Folks, one of these things is not like the other. And this isn't some rando. There's always bad stuff happening. It's your sister church's priest's family. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.